The next speaker is somebody who defined the field of pediatric neurology in Mumbai and in India and needs no introduction again. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Vrajesh Udani as the next speaker for this CME. Except for loving it, not many are consciously aware of the science behind sleep, especially in CMEs, which is consciously absent today. Sir is going to elucidate a little bit more on that. Wake up to sleep, Dr. Udani.
Thanks. How do I get now?
I'll do it. Which one? Which one have you loaded?
This one. Let's put it in.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. At the outset, I must thank the organizers for actually giving me this opportunity to talk on Anand's birthday anniversary. And things or something, I met this Anand Chandelier. I said, my God, this is the guy I heard so much about. And over a period of time, we developed this friendship, which went on over the years, especially through this PG clinics at Sion, which I remember so well. And finally, a few months before his unfortunate passing away, he actually sent me his first book. So I thought, that Anand Chandelier, though he came late in my life, is somebody I always remember. Now, I talked about sleep. I thought sleep is an important thing because Anand was a lifestyle person. He had his, as somebody has mentioned before, very well organized, get up at a particular time, exercise, eat the right things, and do everything else. And we wonder how much lifestyle plays in our pediatric diseases. So I thought, many years ago I was guilty of not telling my patients about sleep. And then once I got into it, I realized how important it actually is. And I thought I'll share what I've heard about, what I've read about, and what I've learnt about in sleep. So this is, of course, somebody who had the wrong concept. She said sleeping is a waste of time and it's a form of death, which I hope I'll be able to change by the time this talk is over. So let's see, all animals sleep, and if you look at a 75-year-old average life expectancy, 1/3 of your life is in sleep. And it's surprising, but we are here, humans are here, and as you look at it, you'll find the bigger animals, like for example, let me see where he is. The elephant sleeps only 4 hours, and the smaller animals sleep a little more. But everybody sleeps, and obviously sleep is a very important part of our life. There are some obvious benefits of sleep, and some not very obvious. And everybody knows that when you don't sleep very well at night, your attention suffers. Your mood becomes bad, you become irritable, you wonder, where did she get up this side, or which side of the bed did she get up this morning? So it all depends on, your sleep, which actually is important for all these things. Judgment, for example, maybe as simple as motor judgment. If you drive, your judgment suffers if you're sleep deprived. Motivation. And then there are some not so obvious benefits of sleep. Immune functions. So immune functions suffer, there are more infections, and minor and major, and therefore this is an important part of immunology as well. Metabolic, and over here you can see the gamut of diseases which are seen mainly in adult life, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and recently even Alzheimer's disease. So the ones who have poor sleep, Alzheimer's is now conceptualized as a disorder where you don't get rid of your waste products in your brain, and that leads to amyloid and beta amyloid deposition, and you actually get Alzheimer's. So in general, sleep is very important. Everybody knows that. But what is the relevance to the pediatric population? So first I'll just talk a little bit about normal sleep, and then I'll talk about something else. Most of you would know this. We have the stages of sleep. In the first, few, you have this stage 2 sleep, which you start off with, drowsiness and stage 2, so 1 and 2. Then you go into delta sleep, when it's really deep, and when there's absolutely no recollection of what happens at that time. And then you have these periods which start about 1.5 later, where you have REM sleep, and these sort of increase as you go along to the morning hours. So I'm sure many of you have this experience that when you wake up in the morning, sometimes you wake up in your dream, and that's very often the REM sleep, because you dream in REM sleep. That's an important thing. In REM sleep, the way we are, we cannot move during REM sleep. We are moving in our minds with all these violent dreams, but we can't move, and that's a very important thing. And in adults, there's a condition called REM behavior disorder, where you actually move in REM sleep. So that has led to a lot of violence in domestic situations where the wife may get hurt because she's sleeping next to this. So this is something important, that this REM sleep is what happens, and how does it change over the lifespan. So if you look at the lifespan, in the newborn period, you have a lot of REM sleep, and at the end of our life, we have much less. And if you look at the number of hours which a newborn actually sleeps, maybe as much as 16 hours, and our time we sleep about 6 or so. But generally 6 hours is the minimum amount of sleep which must be had by everybody, even when you're old enough. Now this is the basic thing which I want to talk about, sleep and learning. So how do we learn? Okay, the first thing is the prefrontal lobe. This part of the lobe is anterior to the motor areas, and is most important thing which separates us from other animals and other things. So this is where encoding and registration takes place. So I'm saying something, you're actually encoding or registering that fact in the prefrontal cortex. And that is usually deficient in patients who have ADHD, etc. Then whatever you learn goes into a temporary store, which is the hippocampus on both sides of the brain. Verbal on the left side, visual on the right side. So whatever you learn, whatever you see. And then finally when you retrieve, that comes from the association neocortices of the brain. For example, words are in the temporal lobe, motor functions are in the frontal lobe, etc. So these are long-term memories which are stored in the association neocortex. So how does this happen? How does this, what you learn, get stored temporarily and then finally get into the cortex for long-term memory? So this is a cartoon which actually tells us. So this is wakefulness, sleep and wakefulness. And this young boy is actually learning, encoding that the green is over here and the gray color, whatever, is here in this particular pattern. So he's learning this, he's encoding it, and this basically goes, it goes into the anterior frontal lobe, and you get this memory trace, which is a pattern of neurons which are involved in that particular memory. And as you can see, there are it's dotted lines, dashed lines, which means it's not yet fully fixed. Goes into the hippocampus, and then it has to go back into the cortex. In sleep, what happens is this hippocampal memory trace is transferred into the association cortex. And finally, when you awaken, this particular thing is stored, you can remember it, and if you have to learn something else, it goes back. This was a different memory trace. So this goes back into the hippocampus. And this is how we learn generally. But it's not as simple as I'm making out to be, so I'll just tell you a little bit more. So how does slow wave sleep consolidate memory? So it's initial learning experience. So when you learn something, then you lay down a hippocampal, unstable, that is the dotted lines, memory trace. And then you get this peculiar thing of spontaneous replays. So whenever you replay an unstable memory, it becomes more stable over time. So it's like hearing a musical piece. First time you may not remember the words, you may not remember the music very well, but if it is replayed, very often this happens. So in slow wave sleep, these replays occur to make the memory trace more stable and permanent, and then finally it goes into the association cortices. And why slow wave sleep? Why does it happen in slow wave sleep? Because if you look at it in awake and in REM sleep, because in REM sleep also there's a lot of activity in the form of dreams, etc., new memories erase previous ones. So whenever you are learning something else in the daytime, it's always a problem to consolidate a memory because more and more memories are coming from all different directions. And in slow wave sleep, which is delta sleep, the deep delta sleep, no new memories are formed because it's very quiet, and therefore all this stuff can be done very easily. So this has been proven. If this is sleep, this is awake, you learn something, you sleep, and then you retest. This is the paradigm, that this is where you expose to a particular information, then you sleep and then you retest to see how much he remembers. And this one, the same thing has happened, but he is not allowed to sleep. And if you look at the participants, those who sleep tend to remember much more than those who are awake. So if you want to learn something, after every lecture, you should actually go to sleep. And then, you'll be able to remember what you learned. Now, can we enhance memory by manipulating sleep? So, these are very interesting experiments. I'm not saying this is very relevant to clinical practice, but if you are learning something, and at that time, they use this experiment of an odor. So there's a particular odor. And then you compare that those who were learning the same thing and a particular odor was given, if it happened in slow wave sleep and you expose in slow wave sleep when the person is completely sleeping, you give the odor again to that person, you actually retain more. And this is shown by the hippocampus lighting up. So odors melt during learning, encoding, and if repeated during SWS, will improve retrieval after waking up. So it's something really interesting if you want to improve your memory. Of course, you can't do this in actual practice. Now you're coming to sleeping disorders, and I'll just run through this. All of you know this, but 7-year-old boy comes with seizures, diagnosed as benign focal epilepsy, and this is his EEG, and you see the typical Rolandic epilepsy. And then, after 1 year of treatment, has a lot of cognitive changes, inattention, etc., and is diagnosed as ADHD. And if you look at the EEG now, even though he has no seizures, he's got terribly bad EEG. And the reason is very simple. Slow wave sleep is disrupted. So when he should be consolidating his memory, he's got continuous activity in that time, and this memory consolidation is disrupted. So in other words, that is the reason why you don't learn. If you look at epilepsy in general, many patients have a low IQ, 20 to 30%. And the number of discharges on your EEG decide, and depending on the site of the discharges. For example, in Becht, which is the most common spikes in the nocturnal state, the right side spikes, if you have only right side spikes, you will disrupt spatial function. If you have only left side spikes, you will disrupt language function. So it all depends on where your spikes are. And therefore, clearly it's become evident now that epileptic discharges, especially in slow wave sleep, depending on where they are, can cause different cognitive changes. So other things also happen in epilepsy, like OSA, etc., but you won't go into that. And this sleep deprivation activates discharges. So this is where sleep comes in and lifestyle modification comes in. You don't sleep enough if you're an epileptic, you get more discharges, and this whole thing becomes a vicious cycle. Let's look at ASD, autism and ADHD. Very common. Everybody has problems, and who's treated autism knows that there's a sleep initiation problem. They can't sleep early. And then there's a sleep maintenance problem. So they sleep late and they get up very early, maybe in the middle of the night. And those who have bad sleep, we did a study in autism long term, we found that those who had sleep problems early tended to do much worse than those who didn't have. So it's really, sleep seems to be something which can prognosticate also in autism. And probably because memory consolidation is further compromised in this disorder. And therefore, melatonin very often is something which we use in autism to sort of regularize this sleep-wake cycle disorder. Migraine, everybody knows, you don't sleep, you get headaches, and there's a lot of other things too which can cause sleep problems in migraine, like disordered breathing, etc., etc. And obviously sleep helps abort attacks, especially in those who are younger. And this is sleep disordered breathing, which is another important cause of problems. It is seen in 4% of normal children and 11% of those who actually snore. And preschoolers do much worse. So this is the kind of children who will have daytime somnolence. Yes, but not daytime somnolence alone. They have a lot of learning issues. So if you have a child who comes to you for a learning problem, hyperactivity, you always ask the question, does the child snore? Does the child sleep with the mouth open? And then check for adenoids, etc., which of course is the most common, where you can correct it. So what is the current Indian scenario? And I think this is the important thing, because what happens in India. So first, before I go to that, how much do kids need to sleep? So this is kind of recommended kind of thing in the range. Infants 12 to 15, toddlers 11 to 14, etc. But this is important. At least your child, a teenager should sleep 8 hours, school-age child 9 hours, preschoolers 10, toddlers 11, infants 12. This is something you should remember, because it's important to tell your parents about how much a child needs to sleep. Many parents think 8 hours is enough because they sleep 8 hours, but obviously it's not, depending on the age. And this is, of course, the main reason for this is that, this is a survey which was done, that 93% of Indians, including us, don't get enough sleep. And most of the times, nowadays, it's because of electronics and, more importantly, lack of rules. There's nothing like discipline. We always want to mollycoddle our children. We don't enforce rules, and if one person enforces, the other person, of course, does not allow that, especially the mother-in-law. And then you have infant and toddler sleep times. Just look at the difference. The guys who really got it right are the New Zealanders in Australia. The average time you sleep, infant toddlers, is about 12 to 13 hours. And look at our kids. We are here. We are about 11 hours. And that too, not correct way. So you may sleep 4 hours in the afternoon and then sleep late at the night and get up early in the morning. So it's not restful sleep. Afternoon sleep is not restful because you don't normally go into deep sleep. You don't have much of REM sleep, etc. So afternoon sleep is not something which is a good this thing. Japanese people are the only people who do worse than us, Japanese children. Situation is obviously worse in adolescence. I don't need to tell you that, but these are the figures, 8 hours in ninth and even less. And many of them complain of daytime sleepiness, grades are dropping, less extracurricular activities, etc. So what do you do? What is the basic bottom line? What is the meat of this talk? Is you have to emphasize lifestyle changes. And even if you do not have a disease, you have to inculcate these habits into your kids. So you have to sleep before 9 o'clock. Let's just have a survey. How many sleep before 9 o'clock? No one. Correct. All of us 11 o'clock, and the Ulhasnagar ones are the worst. They sleep at 2 o'clock. So I have no idea why, but the father comes from work at 11 o'clock. He insists that he should talk to the kid. The kid wants to meet him, and then they sleep at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And it's crazy. This kind of, so sleeping before 9 o'clock, at least below the age of 10 years, is a must. Now, what is sleep hygiene? It's a very nice word. But people follow routines. Routines make us less anxious, make us more calm, make us, so all these things are very important. And routines must be established. You've seen those pictures of foreign moms sitting and reading a little bit before in a darkened room, just, and then there's no TV, there's no lights, there's nothing else. And then as the fellow drifts off, she goes in. All this doesn't happen in our setting, because the mom and the kid and everybody sleep in the same room, probably on the same bed. So this is the biggest problem. This is one of the things that the AAP recommends. If possible, no parents in the room. तो हो ही नहीं सकता है. So what we should do is, at about 9 o'clock, 8:30 or whatever, the mom should go make the kid sleep and then come out. And obviously there should be no screens. So I think if you want to learn, and this is what I, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, used to do when we were younger, is you go to schoolwork, usually in the morning, not too early, not at 6:30 and ridiculous times like that, but maybe, 8:30, 9. You would never like to go in the afternoon, because afternoon is not a good time to go to learn. And after that, you take a short nap after lunch, you consolidate your memory, and then after that, you don't work, you do recreation and play, which is, 1 hour or whatever. Then you do homework and dinner, so again you consolidate your memory in the night. And this is the way actually you can improve learning and improve Indian young minds, so that later on, it becomes easier to cope in a very competitive life. So key messages are really simple. All of you know that sleep is a key in memory and learning, and this is the most important message I want to tell you, that slow wave sleep. And remember, slow wave sleep decreases in older people, and that's the reason why I think I forget nowadays. And I think that's the reason many of us lose our memories as we grow older, because there's no memory consolidation happening. Indian kids, of course, sleep less. Sleep problems are very important in many. And I think in practice, you must spend at least 2-3 minutes on sleep hygiene. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think that is the most compelling argument for an increased nap in the afternoon. I have a very interesting situation here, because the next speaker, Dr. Udani. So I have a question to ask Dr. Vrajesh Udani. Since you are married to an intensivist, how many times in the night does your sleep get disturbed by phone calls? So I think that's the question we should ask to Dr. Udani ma'am, and please put your hands together. She's our next speaker, and she's going to talk about FAQs on pediatric emergencies, and maybe you can take off from what Sir said, how important is sleep for a pediatric intensivist as well.